All right, how's it going, everybody? So today I'm going to be going over the questions for your essay number one and basically just kind of giving some more context for them and really just showing you a thought process of like how I would attempt to approach each question. Just so you have a jumping off point of like, oh, okay, that's how Tana might do it. Here's how I could also tackle these questions because they're kind of in depth. So that's what we're doing. So here are the questions laid out for you if you haven't read them already. I'm going to be going over them one by one, so I won't reread them here. But if you haven't read them at all yet, then you can pause and read them. And before we start, just some like general points for you. Each question should use at least 3 quotes from the readings. So depending on the question you choose, you might use just 1 reading, you might use 2 readings, you might use 3. No matter what combination you choose, you need at least 3 quotes. So if you use like 1 reading, you need 3 quotes from that one. If you use 2 readings, you'll need 2 quotes from one of them and 1 from another. And if you use 3 different readings, you need 1 quote from each, right? So that's kind of how that works. And the second point here says there is no one way to tackle any of these questions. So you might end up going in like a totally different direction than I did. And that's okay. In fact, I encourage that. I'm just kind of here to like lead by example and show you some evidence and like just how I discuss a question to show, I'm just trying to show some of the thought processes that I would use, right? So you might implement that for the papers in this class. And yeah, I just want to show you how I would tackle them. So I also kind of lied to y'all because I think in Thursday last week I said that there was no maximum word count. There is. I just forgot. So the rough draft is 500 to 750 words and the final draft is 750 to 1,000. So yeah, just keep that in mind that there is a maximum. Obviously, if it's like 2 words below or over, I think that's totally fine. But like I wouldn't go more than like 50 or like 100 above or below. So I mean, 500 is like really short. It'd be really hard to get less than 500 words. But yeah, just in case you needed like actual numbers, there you go. MLA citations, of course, that's what we use in English classes in this college. So make sure you include those. And just some other points that I noted below. Typically, our essays will be 5 paragraphs. Sometimes 4. You might be able to get away with a 4-paragraph essay. It would just mean that your 2 body paragraphs would have to be a bit longer. But yeah, I would say typically just try to aim for 5. And so yeah, you'd have your intro, your 3 body paragraphs, and then your conclusion. And then just remember the fundamental writing elements, right? And so I think it was Zoe who was like, oh, I didn't take English 101 for like, it was like 5 years ago, right? So if it's been a while and you just kind of forgot, then the like fundamental writing elements that we use are like the hook, right? Transitions, paraphrasing, and analysis. The hook is the thing that captures the reader. Transition is the language in between paragraphs to make sure that you're seamlessly flowing from one idea into another. Paraphrasing is when you quote something and then right after you quote it, you restate it in your own words. I think this is one that students often skip a lot, actually. But paraphrasing is important because it gives the reader a chance to understand the quote in your words, right? We want to see how you guys interpret these quotes. And then analysis is where the critical thinking really comes in. That's where you are taking these quotes and then you're saying, okay, here's how it ties back into my thesis and my ideas. So the analysis is where we actually get a sense of like, what argument are you making and how are you proving that? So yeah. So jumping into question number 1, it's kind of long, so bear with me, but it says, narrative is the telling of a story and point of view is the perspective from which a story is told. How does the way the narrator tells the story and the point of view through which they tell it fundamentally affect our experience of reading any or all of the following stories? We ate the children last, what's expected of us, and or the knowers. So kind of long, right? But basically it's saying you have a narrative, right? Which is kind of the tone of the story. It's like how is the narrator choosing to tell the story? Are they leaving details out on purpose, on accident? Like, are they omniscient? Do they know everything that's happening in the story? How is the narrator telling it? And the point of view is like, what does the narrator, like, what position is this narrator in? Are they a part of this world? Are they like God? Like, who is the narrator, right? That's the point of view. So your answer will obviously change depending on how or on which readings you pick. In class, I was only there to discuss We Ate the Children Last with you and Omelis, but that's not in this question. So I would say that story, though, I was lucky to be there because that one does have like a particularly interesting use of narration. We even discussed how in the beginning of that story, I said the personal, I think I meant to say like the article or just the piece. It sounds like a science report, right? Or like a data report. It doesn't sound very personal in the very beginning. It's like, this is what happened. These people had the surgery and then it led from this into this. and we don't really get a sense of who the narrator is. It's not until the very end, right, where there's that shift from third person to first person. The author starts to say we, he says I once, or they say I, we don't actually know who exactly it is, but we start to see that the narrator is in fact part of the world being described. And that shift is very interesting and something that you could definitely analyze in this question. So here's how I would approach question number 1. So personally, I would focus on one story. Likely, We Ate the Children Last, because that story is just the most interesting and perhaps has the most interesting and dynamic use of narration out of all 3 options, in my opinion. And that single story, it has enough within it to talk about for the full essay. So the final essay might be 1,000 words max, which is not much. And like I said, narration and point of view are 2 separate elements that you can focus on for 2 of the body paragraphs. So you have enough material in that one story to use just one if you want to. And I would probably do that because it would make an easier essay to write. I would just know what to focus on. If I included a second story, it's just more things to juggle, right, in my essay. So that's what I would do. You can choose multiple if you want to. Just make sure that you're talking about, you're explaining, you're answering the question for both of them, right? If you do that, which would just require probably a little bit more writing. So evidence for question number 1. I'll skip We Ate the Children Last because I think it's kind of self-explanatory and I've been talking about it. But for What's Expected of Us, which is the story about the button, right? There's a button that it blinks before you press it, right? It says, "This is a warning. Please read carefully," which is a sense of narration, right? So how is the story being told? Well, it literally tells us right from the beginning, it's a warning, right? And then we get a sense of the perspective or the point of view when he says, or they say, "So why did I do it? Because I had no choice." And all of a sudden we get a sense, oh, the person who's telling the story is deeply involved in the story, right? In fact, they're the one writing this warning for us. So the narration starts out boldly and it's really setting the tone and the scene of the story. For the knowers, Ellie says, "I would have preferred to be like Tem. Of course I would have," right? And so the first person of the story makes us really feel like we are Ellie, right? The I in the story. And here it's that use of I that makes us realize there's 2 people in this world that are being described. There's people like us, right, the knowers, and there's people like Tem, the people who don't know. And so that is an interesting use of both narration and point of view because it really creates a split, right? There's people on one side who know, there's people on the other side who don't know, and that's just how this world is now. So that's some of the evidence that I would use for question number 1. Again, the evidence that you choose, you might need more quotes if you end up only using one story. But moving on to question number 2, again, a long question, says, "In both the knowers and What's Expected of Us, humanity is met with hard, inescapable truths, namely how everything is predetermined and predestined. In these stories, what difficulties does this knowledge cause? What do these stories suggest is the proper way to be in the face of such painful knowledge? How should we live?" So something light for question number 2, just really chill. Everything is predetermined and predestined. Why should we even continue on? I mean, that's basically what this question is asking you. It's okay, well, if we don't have free will, then what are we supposed to do, right? How should we live? So I don't know because I wasn't in all the classes, but last time that this question was taught, Professor Solinger played a video which basically concluded that free will does not exist, right? It was a quick YouTube video, and it talks about how your body sends signals to move a few milliseconds before you actually move or whatever. So even when it comes to your own body, you don't have free will. And we see this sentiment of not having free will echoed in the stories as well, right? In the knowers, we see that death is predestined, and even if you know or you don't know, there's nothing you can do to change when it actually occurs. And in What's Expected of Us, the narrator literally says at the beginning, right? My message to you is that, or maybe, I don't know if it's the beginning, I think it's towards the end. He says, "My message to you is this: pretend that you have free will." He's basically saying you don't have free will, but you should pretend that you do, right? So if we're really getting the sense that, oh, free will doesn't exist, that's the conclusion that we come to from these readings, right? Then it's kind of the answer that you would come up with, or that would become your thesis, unless you can think of a way to argue that free will does exist. In which case, go for it. I highly recommend that you do that if you want to, but just make sure you have evidence to back up your claim. If you're going to say free will does exist, you have to say, okay, here's where it shows that in the text, right? So it would be a much harder question or a much harder argument to make because we just don't really see that sentiment being said throughout these these different stories. So personally, I would make my thesis something like this. I would say, through these stories, we have come to understand that free will is a fallacy. Yet, we are better off pretending that it is real anyways, because otherwise we risk falling into despair. So, you can use essentially the same idea here, which is that free will is not real, but we're better off pretending that it is real, because otherwise, we'll be really sad, or we'll be in a waking coma. Like, the exact language that you use, you should just change it up a bit. Don't use my quote verbatim here, because that is plagiarism, but this idea is pretty universal, I would say. So you can use the idea, just make sure you change the actual language. Now, in the knowers, we get kind of an example of this in this quote when she says, what is it? Sorry. On the morning of April 17th, 2043, I was half amazed to open my eyes to the light, 6 hours and 4 minutes into the day, and I was alive. Petrified, scared to move, even a muscle, I wondered how death would come for me. So here, we get a sense that, like, Ellie she's basically fallen into despair, right? She knows when she's supposed to die, and she's not pretending like she has free will. She is succumbing to the fact that she does not have free will. She's like, well, it's all predestined. Why should I even move, right? Or she's too scared to move. Whereas on the other side, we have what's expected of us when the narrator says, the reality isn't important. What's important is your belief, and believing the lie is the only way to avoid a waking coma. Civilization now depends on self-deception. Perhaps it always has. So pretty explicit how that relates back to my thesis, right? And pretty clear, a pretty clear like answer to the question, which is even if we don't have free will, we have to pretend that we do, because otherwise we'll be in a waking coma, right? And that second part too, that says civilization now depends on self-deception, perhaps it always has, you could totally relate to like current events as well, or like our modern world where it often feels like we don't really have choices or options, and like we want change, but it doesn't feel possible. But the only way to actually make change is like we still got to pretend like we can, right? And hopefully one day that change will come. So that's some of the evidence that I might use for question number 2. Moving into question number 3, another long question. We live in an age of remakes, reboots, revivals, and reimaginings. Isabel Kim writes a sort of sequel to Ursula Le Guin's Omelas tale. But why? How is her story different? And which story do you think presents the best attempt at a solution to a problem like Omelas? To walk away, as in Le Guin, or to fight back, as in Kim's? So this question can be broken down into 2 parts. So the first part is, how are the stories different? So what did Kim bring to the table that Le Guin didn't cover already? And the second part is, and which story offers a best attempt at a solution for Omelas? So which one is the course of action that we should take if we were in the situation, right? The first part, in my opinion, is a lot easier to discuss, right? We talked about it in class. Kim brings a more like tangible tone to the story, where the original felt like a thought experiment. Le Guin is kind of saying like, okay, here's this world, here's what's happening there, here's the city, these kids are in this hole, right? This is kind of like what's going on, what would you do in this scenario? Kim is like, oh, this is happening, right? It almost feels like a New York Times article, or just like, I don't know, maybe a blog post or something about something that is going on, and that makes us interpret the story a bit differently. So there are plenty more ways that the story is different that you can discuss as well, but those are kind of the 2 that stood out to me. But the second part of the story is a bit harder, because it depends on the opinion of the person answering, aka you, and it also depends on what you define as a best attempt at a solution. So I try to break it down here, because maybe in your mind, right, a best attempt is just walking away, because from Kim's story, it seems like even killing the kid is no resolution for Omelas, right? That is not our solution, as Kim lays out, right? So our best bet is to just walk away and start a new life somewhere else, like free ourselves from the mental trauma that was Omelas, right? Or maybe you think that the rebellious approach of Kim's story is the way to go, that actually like trying to change something is what we should be doing. And even though from the ending of the story, we see that it hasn't been resolved, perhaps there is a possibility of resolution, right? Maybe if they kill enough kids, Omelas will stop putting a kid in the hole, right? And then maybe the country just becomes like any other country, right? Which maybe isn't the solution that we wanted, but it's a better solution than just like keeping a kid in the hole, right? So I also did mention to a group last week that, like, when you guys were breaking out, that you can desire one outcome while personally choosing something else, right? So like deep down, you might really want to act a certain way, but you might also know like, I just don't have what it takes to do that. So I was saying this because, like, for example, deep down, I would wish I could be a rebel and kill the kids, because while I don't want to murder children, I would want something to change. And at least those people are taking action and they're trying to like change the status quo, right? But ultimately, I think I just know I would not have what it takes to be somebody who kills the kids. And so I would just walk away from MLS. Like I would just run away from my problems. So you can desire one thing, I can want to kill the kids to create change, but also just do another, which I would just walk away, right? So this question is honestly a great place to discuss why sometimes like acting on what we think is like why acting on what we think is the best solution, it's not as easy as it seems, right? We can want change in one way, but it's hard to do another. And again, you could probably relate that to some modern things that we have in today's day and age as well. But yeah, question 3 really just comes down to sort of like, I guess like moral decisions here. Again, it comes down to what you define as a best attempt at a solution, right? And like, what even is a solution? Is a solution like not killing kids anymore? Is a solution like not having a kid in the hole? Is a solution like walking away, pretending Omelis doesn't exist? Like, what is the solution, and why would you choose that course of action? So some evidence that I found here for the 2 stories is Le Guin at the very end. She says, "Night falls, the traveler must pass down village streets, between the houses with yellow lit windows and on out into the darkness of the fields, each alone. They go west or north towards the mountains. They go on, they leave Omelis, they walk ahead into the darkness, they do not come back." So I'd be like, that's me. I'm walking away. I think that's our best course of action. We can just, like, if everybody walks out of Omelis, then Omelis is no longer, right? And then in Kim's story, she says, "By now everyone except the newscasters had stopped counting dead children, and nobody has any questions for the murderers anymore. The dead murderer was wrong. They haven't run out of children, but they haven't run out of murderers either." So, you know, you could use that if you were in support of like continuing to murder the kids, right? They haven't run out of murderers. We can keep murdering kids and maybe something will change, right? Maybe something will happen. But ultimately, the evidence that you use can vary wildly or widely depending on how you choose to answer this question. But these are pretty general quotes that I think can work for either side that you choose. So yeah, it's kind of hard to pull evidence for this one just because it really depends on how you approach it. So yeah, that is kind of the rundown of the questions. Of course, if you have any questions regarding them, feel free to email me or come to my office hours on Sunday from noon to 2. And yeah, I mean, I will also be, I think next class I will show you guys an example essay that I have like, what's it called? Not graded, but like provided feedback on. So you could just email me your essay as well. If you don't want to like talk to me, you can just email me a PDF or a Word document and be like, "Hey, will you give this a look?" And I will mark it up and send it back to you so you have some revisions that you can make. But yeah, if you have any other questions, again, feel free to email me or Professor Solinger, and I look forward to seeing you guys' first drafts. So yeah, bye for now.